August 18, 1944. St-Lambert-sur-Dives, Normandy, France. The sun was sinking low, staining the shattered rooftops in a bruised orange glow. The air tasted of cordite and dust, thick enough to chew. Horses, abandoned in panic, whinnied somewhere behind the collapsed stone walls. Burnt-out German trucks still crackled with heat. And at the center of the crossroads, boots planted in the dirt road, stood Major David Currie of the South Alberta Regiment, tall, calm, coat unbuttoned despite the heat, watching the enemy approach through a haze of drifting smoke. He already knew what the maps hadn't shown clearly enough. This was the final open exit out of the Falaise pocket, the last artery through which the crumbling German 7th Army could escape annihilation. Every minute that crossroads remained open meant thousands more enemy soldiers slipping away to fight another day. But if the Allies could seal it, if even a small group could hold here long enough, Normandy would finally belong to them. Currie lowered his binoculars, exhaled slowly, and wiped the grit from his brow. To the east, the distant rumble of British artillery echoed like thunder rolling across fields of flattened wheat. To the west, the Americans were pushing hard, tightening the noose. And up this narrow village road, somewhere beyond the smoke, German engines coughed and revved, eager to break free. He turned to his men, tired, sweat-streaked faces staring back at him. Roughly 200 Canadians, supported by a handful of Sherbrooke Fusilier Shermans and anti-tank guns. Not nearly enough. Not for what was coming. But no one said a word. "Dig in," Currie ordered, voice even. "We hold this crossroads. No one gets through." A Sherman tank lurched forward, its tracks grinding against shattered masonry as it pivoted into firing position beside the churchyard. Its commander popped out of the hatch, scanning the street with narrowed eyes. Infantry fanned out along both sides of the road, taking cover behind walls and rubble, fixing bayonets, checking magazines. The priest's stone garden wall, once a peaceful border of roses, was now a makeshift fighting position lined with Bren guns. St-Lambert had once been a quiet agricultural village, the kind of place where neighbors spoke at windows and children chased chickens through the square. But now it was scarred, hollowed, stripped of sound except for the mechanical clatter of machine guns somewhere in the distance. The Falaise Gap, just miles away, was choking with German troops desperately trying to flee. They had one objective: break through this village and reach the Seine. Currie knew they would come in waves. Behind him, a young corporal swallowed hard, knuckles white around his rifle. He looked barely 20. Currie rested a hand on the man's shoulder, not a reassurance, but an acknowledgement: "You're here. You matter. Stand with us." A distant engine revved. Another joined it. Then another. Currie raised his binoculars again. Through the drifting dust, through the fractured silhouettes of roofs and chimneys, movement emerged. Half-tracks, trucks loaded with infantry, motorcycles weaving like hornets among them. German soldiers clung to the sides of vehicles, helmets glinting, uniforms filthy from weeks of retreat. They weren't an organized spearhead, they were a desperate flood. British commanders behind the lines never expected such a force to funnel through one tiny village. No one imagined that a single Canadian major, unknown to most outside his regiment, would be the one staring them down. But Currie didn't blink. He spoke into his radio, voice steady, stripped of emotion. "Hold fire. Wait until they're committed." The Sherman crews tightened their grips on their triggers. Infantry shifted, adjusting their breathing. A fly buzzed lazily around a broken windowpane before falling still, silenced by the oppressive heat. 50 meters. 40. 30. The first German half-track roared into the open square, unaware of what waited. Its passengers looked half-dead already, bandaged heads, hollow eyes, uniforms torn. If they noticed the Canadians aiming rifles at them from the shadows, they had no time to react. Currie's arm dropped. The crossroads exploded. The Sherman 75mm cannon fired first, the blast shaking loose debris from shattered homes. The half-track lurched sideways, wheels snapping, flames chewing up its frame. German soldiers tumbled out, screaming, rolling across the dirt before machine gun fire cut them down. Bren gunners unleashed controlled bursts, stitching the street with sparks. The air filled with splinters, screams, metal fragments, and rising smoke so thick it swallowed the rooftops. But more vehicles pushed forward, desperation overruling fear. Currie didn't wait for orders from above. He didn't have time. Shift left. Hit the lead vehicles, block the road. Another Canadian tank roared, tracks grinding forward, firing again. The explosion shook the earth, sending a shockwave through the village. A truck erupted into a bloom of smoke and fire, tumbling sideways, its cargo spilling onto the cobblestones, helmets, rifles, bodies. Still, the Germans kept coming. And as the sun dipped lower, the sky glowing red behind the ruins, every man on that crossroads understood the same truth. They were outnumbered, severely. They were isolated. And they were the only ones standing between an entire army and freedom. Currie didn't retreat. He simply adjusted his stance, lifted his field glasses again, and whispered to no one in particular. Section 2, The Longest Evening in Normandy. Previous section text. The wrecked half-track still burned in the square, its flames twisting upward like a signal flare, an invitation, a warning, a challenge. But the Germans answered anyway. Dusk settled over St-Lambert like a damp blanket, muting colors, sharpening shadows. Smoke curled through broken doorways and drifted along the narrow streets, making the village feel smaller, compressed, suffocating. The only light came from burning vehicles and the occasional muzzle flash. Every explosion echoed off stone walls, multiplying into chaos. Currie moved with calculated calm through the crossroads, boots crunching over shattered glass, occasionally brushing aside a drifting ember. He checked on the Sherman positioned near the church, his hand tapping the scorched armor plate as if greeting an old friend. Inside, the gunner wiped sweat from his brow and nodded at him, exhausted, but steady. "How many rounds left?" Currie asked. "Enough to make them think twice, sir," the gunner replied, forcing a grin. Currie didn't smile back. He couldn't afford to, not yet. On the village's western edge, Canadian infantry crouched behind a collapsed barn, rifles trained on the tree line. They heard the metallic rattle long before shapes emerged, half a dozen German motorcyclists, engines sputtering desperately. They weren't scouts, they were fleeing. But even desperation could be dangerous. "Hold," whispered Lieutenant Gagnon, raising a clenched fist. The motorcycles accelerated, tires skidding across loose gravel. One rider waved frantically behind him, urging others forward, until the Canadians opened fire. The first bike toppled instantly, its wheels still spinning as its rider slid across the road. Two more swerved into a ditch, crashing into the tall, trampled wheat. The surviving riders scrambled for cover, firing blindly. Gagnon waited until their helmets reappeared over the embankment, then pointed. Bren guns. Now. A storm of bullets answered, echoing through the fields before fading just as quickly. Silence followed, uneasy, temporary. Currie arrived moments later, breath steady, revolver still holstered. He scanned the carnage, jaw set, mind already calculating. "They're testing us," he murmured. "Seeing where the weak spots are." Gagnon nodded. "Sir, they'll be back. In force." Currie didn't deny it. They could both feel it in the air, pressure building, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. Along the eastern road, Sergeant Bill Overton dragged an anti-tank gun into a tighter angle, muscles straining as the weapon groaned across uneven ground. The Canadians had transformed the entire village into a trap, overlapping arcs of fire, improvised choke points, hidden kill zones. They weren't defending a town. They were sealing a coffin. But even coffins could be broken open. A distant roar rose beyond the river, deep, resonant, unmistakable. "Tanks! Positions!" Someone shouted, voice cracking with urgency. Currie didn't raise his binoculars this time. He already knew. "Panzer IVs," he said quietly. They finally sent armor. The first German tank emerged through the smoke like a waking monster, angled steel, turrets swiveling, treads chewing through rubble. A second followed close behind, escorted by infantry carrying Panzerfausts. They advanced cautiously, their discipline a stark contrast to the panicked motorcyclists before them. The Canadians held their breath. "Wait," Overton whispered, watching the gunner behind his sights. The Panzer rolled farther into the square, just a little more, until its side armor was exposed. Now. The anti-tank gun fired, the blast shaking windows already cracked from the earlier barrage. The shell slammed into the Panzer's flank, punching clean through before, erupting in a geyser of sparks and flame. The tank lurched, coughing smoke, turret drooping like a wounded animal. Its hatch flew open and a crewman crawled out, only to be cut down by rifle fire. The second Panzer reacted instantly, turrets swinging toward the gun crew. "Down!" Someone yelled. The cannon fired, and the world burst into white heat. When the dust settled, the anti-tank gun lay overturned, wheel splintered, shield twisted, smoke rising from what remained of the crew. Overton's body lay still beside it. For the first time that day, Currie hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of grief. He knelt briefly, placing a hand on the ruined gun. Then he stood, expression hardening into something carved from steel. "Shift the Shermans forward," he ordered. "We take that one before it reloads." Engines growled in response. A Canadian Sherman rumbled out from behind a smashed farmhouse, swinging wide, using debris as cover. Its gun barked once, direct hit. The German tank spat flame, then went silent. But the infantry behind it didn't break. They surged forward, firing from the hip, shouting over the roar of engines and collapsing masonry. Bullets pinged against Canadian helmets, ripped through walls, kicked up dirt near Currie's boots. He didn't move. Instead, he raised his voice, calm, certain, unwavering. "Steady. Let them waste their courage." Canadian rifles answered with cold precision. One by one, the German assault faltered, first slowed, then staggered, then stopped altogether. Bodies littered the road. Their escape route, so close, remained blocked. The night deepened, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. Currie checked his watch. This had only been the first few hours. And the Germans still had tens of thousands trapped behind them, desperate, cornered, and running out of time. Section 3. Nightfall in the Killing Ground. Previous section text. Smoke crawled across the square like a living thing, thick, oily, refusing to rise. It stung eyes, clung to skin, and settled into every crease of uniform fabric. The village of St-Lambert had become a furnace, and night only intensified the heat trapped between stone walls. Currie stood beside the wrecked fountain in the crossroads, its once clear water now blackened with soot and oil. In the dim glow of burning vehicles, the carved angels atop the basin looked scorched, wings chipped and broken. They watched over the scene like silent witnesses. Behind him, stretcher-bearers moved quickly but carefully, their boots squelching through mud turned dark with blood. The low moans of the wounded mixed with the distant rumble of artillery, British and German alike, pounding somewhere beyond the pocket. A weary private approached, helmet askew, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "Sir, ammunition check. Bren teams are down to 2 drums each. Some rifles are nearly dry." Currie nodded, already expecting the report. "Redistribute. Nobody fires unless they see a face, not a shadow." The private nodded and jogged off into the darkness. For a moment, the village fell quiet, an unsettling quiet, the kind that carried intent. Then, from the riverbank, a flare streaked upward, brilliant white, hissing through the smoky air until it burst over the rooftops, bathing the ruins in harsh, sterile light. The shadows vanished. Every crater, corpse, and shattered window became painfully visible. Currie whispered, "Here they come." The sound followed, boots slapping against wet earth, men shouting in German, weapons clattering. Dozens of soldiers emerged from the orchards near the dives, sprinting low, desperate to reach the road. Some still carried wounded comrades over their shoulders. Others waved frantically, urging stragglers forward. They weren't attacking, they were fleeing. But flight could turn to violence in an instant. "Hold fire." Lieutenant Gagnon called out, raising a hand. The Germans reached the center of the road and froze. A single Sherman loomed in front of them, turret pointed straight at their chests, engine idling like a predator ready to pounce. Canadian infantry rose from behind rubble, rifles aimed and steady. One German officer, a captain judging by the silver piping, looked around, chest heaving, mud splattered across his face. He slowly removed his helmet, expression collapsing into defeat. He raised both hands high, voice cracking. "Nicht schießen. Bitte, don't shoot." The men behind him did the same, hands up, weapons dropped, knees buckling beneath them. One soldier burst into tears, sinking into the dirt. Currie exhaled, not relief, but recognition. These weren't the fanatics. These were the scraped-out remnants of an army that had run out of road. "Disarm and process them," he ordered softly. "Keep them moving. We don't have room for slowing down." As the prisoners were escorted away, a corporal approached, expression grim. "That makes nearly 500, sir." Currie's eyes narrowed. If this many were surrendering here, how many more were still trying to reach the gap? Before he could respond, machine gun fire erupted from the northern lane, stitching sparks across the stonework. The Canadians dove for cover as bullets tore through abandoned carts and shattered window frames. Not everyone fleeing the pocket had given up. The Germans attacking from the north were organized. 3 squads fanning out, supported by an µm-42 positioned in the second-story window of a half-collapsed home. Its rapid-fire rhythm, like ripping cloth, echoed through the street. Gagnon swore, pressing himself behind a demolished wall. They want the crossroads back. Currie assessed quickly. They won't get it. He signaled to a nearby Sherman. The tank lurched forward, its turret rotating toward the glowing window. The gun fired, blasting the upper floor into a cloud of brick and splinters. The µm-42 fell silent instantly, but the infantry below kept pushing, firing as they advanced, slow, deliberate, determined. They weren't panicking. They were probing for weakness. Grenades bounced across the cobblestones. Canadians returned fire. The night turned into a violent strobe. Flash, smoke, scream, silence. A German soldier suddenly emerged from behind an overturned cart, sprinting toward the crossroads with a Panzerfaust balanced on his shoulder. A desperate, suicidal charge. Currie didn't think, he sprinted. The German raised the launcher, aligning it with the nearest Sherman. 5 more steps and he'd have the shot. Currie reached one of his infantrymen, snatched the man's Sten gun, pivoted, and fired. The burst struck the German in the chest, knocking him backward, the Panzerfaust skidding harmlessly across the road. Currie returned the weapon, breath sharp but controlled. Good position. Keep it. The private stared at him, stunned. Where, sir? The German attack faltered, momentum bleeding out as casualties mounted. The survivors retreated into the night, dragging their wounded when they could, leaving others where they fell. Silence returned, real silence this time. Not peaceful, just exhausted. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. Currie rubbed his eyes, feeling the grit beneath his fingers. He hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. None of them had. Sir, Gagnon said, voice barely above a whisper, this can't hold forever. No, Currie agreed. But it only needs to hold long enough. He looked toward the horizon, where distant flashes of artillery flickered like heat lightning. The rest of the Allies were closing the pocket. Every minute they held St-Lambert, thousands more Germans were trapped. A private approached, offering Currie a dented canteen. Water, sir. Currie hesitated, then shook his head. Give it to the wounded first. The private nodded and hurried off. Currie stood alone in the crossroads again, surrounded by wreckage, bodies, and exhausted men. The crossroads still belonged to him, but dawn was coming. And the next attack would be bigger. Section 4. Dawn breaks and hell returns. Previous_section_text. The crossroads lay still, too still. It was the kind of silence that felt borrowed, temporary, like the village itself was holding its breath. By 4:30 a.m., a pale, indifferent light began leaking over the horizon, turning the smoke hanging above St-Lambert into a hazy grey ceiling. The fires that had lit the night were dying out, replaced by smouldering embers and a sour smell of wet ash. Dawn did not bring relief, it exposed everything. German corpses lay twisted along the road. Destroyed half-tracks still smouldered. The riverbank was scattered with abandoned helmets, rifles, maps, anything men could discard to run faster. And through it all, Major David Currie walked the crossroads like a man inspecting the ruins of a storm he somehow survived. His uniform was filthy, caked with mud, dust, and ash. His eyes were bloodshot, his movement stiff, but his posture remained firm. He paused near a knocked-out Sherman, gently placing a hand on its scorched armor. Its crew had died inside, no chance to escape. He bowed his head for a moment. No ceremony, no prayer, just acknowledgement. Footsteps approached. Sergeant Kelm wiped soot from his face before speaking. Sir, scouts report movement, lots of it. East side of the village. Vehicles, infantry, maybe armor. Currie didn't ask if they were friendly. At this hour, only one side was desperate enough to move. He turned, scanning the weary cluster of Canadians, the same 200 men who had stood with him through the night. Some were eating dry rations with trembling hands. Others slept sitting up, rifles still across their laps. Medics continued their grim work, wrapping tourniquets, whispering reassurances they no longer believed. Currie raised his voice, not loud, but steady. Everyone up. Check ammunition, check weapons. They're coming again. Groans, sighs, a few muttered curses, but the Canadians rose. Not because they weren't afraid, but because no one else could hold this ground. A distant rumble drifted across the fields, like thunder rolling under the earth. Engines. Many of them. Currie lifted his binoculars. Through the dissipating morning mist, silhouettes appeared, trucks, armored cars, horses pulling artillery, marching infantry. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. A column stretching beyond the tree line. They're committing everything, Gagnon whispered beside him. No, Currie corrected quietly. They're committing everyone they have left. This wasn't an attack, it was the last gasp of a dying army. He keyed his radio. This is Currie at St-Lambert. Confirming heavy German movement. Size unknown, but significant. We're engaging. A crackle, then a calm reply from brigade headquarters. Miles away, safe. Understood. Hold position. Currie almost laughed. As if we had another choice. He gave the first order of the day. Shermans. Target the lead vehicles. Infantry. Focus on drivers. We're not letting them build momentum. The Canadians spread out, taking positions behind rubble, fences, shattered stone walls, all that remained of the village. Breath misted faintly in the cooling morning air. Fingers tightened on triggers. The Germans surged forward, not cautious like the night before, but urgent. Trucks overloaded with soldiers. Motorcyclists weaving through the column. Officers waving their pistols, shouting for speed. They could practically smell escape. The first truck roared into the crossroads and immediately exploded, the Sherman's cannon smashing it apart in a single, deafening blast. Bodies scattered across the cobblestones. The following vehicles slammed brakes, veering sideways, blocking the road. Keep firing. Currie commanded. Bren guns hammered from upper windows. Rifle fire rained down from behind toppled walls. The street became a bottleneck, a killing ground. The Germans had no room to maneuver, no cover to sprint toward, no time to reorganize. A half-track attempted to push through the burning wreckage, only to be struck by a P-80 round, flipping onto its side like a wounded animal. Its passengers crawled out, choking, before being forced to surrender at gunpoint. Still, the column kept coming. They're insane, Cal muttered. There's no break left. There's fear, Currie replied. Fear makes men blind. A German officer, refusing to accept reality, stood atop a staff car, waving his troops forward, until a single rifle shot sent him collapsing into the dust. The Canadians were exhausted, low on ammunition, outnumbered 20-1, but their discipline never wavered. Every shot counted. Every order mattered. Every meter of the crossroads remained theirs. A sudden metallic shriek cut through the chaos, tank treads. A Panzer IV burst through the smoke, turret already swinging, gun leveled at the nearest Canadian Sherman. Civilians' homes shook from its weight. Bricks rained from rooftops. The villagers who once lived here would never recognize their own street again. Get the P-80. Gagnon yelled, sprinting toward a nearby doorway. The Panzer fired first, its round striking the Canadian Sherman square on the turret ring. The explosion lit the entire square in white-orange flame. The tank lurched, dead. Two of its crew managed to escape through the hatch, flames licking at their uniforms, before collapsing on the road. Medics rushed out instantly, dragging them to safety. Currie didn't flinch. Flank it, he ordered. Draw it in, make it commit. A Sherman still operational revved forward, baiting the Panzer deeper into the village's tight corridors. The German turret tracked it, too slowly. Before it could fire, a P-80 team popped from behind a stone wall, aimed, and released. The round slammed into the Panzer's engine deck. A heartbeat later, fire erupted from the rear vents. The tank jerked, buckled, and finally stopped moving. Its crew didn't climb out. Cheers didn't follow, only relieved exhalations. The German column was breaking, not because they lacked courage, but because hope was finally gone. White flags began rising. Soldiers dropped rifles. Some staggered forward with hands raised. Others slid to their knees, unable to stand any longer. One surrender became 10, 10 became 50, 50 became hundreds. Currie's men guided them toward holding areas, checking for concealed grenades, keeping rifles trained, not from cruelty, but from survival. A corporal approached, stunned. "Sir, We've taken over 1,000 prisoners since yesterday. Currie stared at the road, littered with abandoned equipment, burning vehicles, bodies. This wasn't victory. This was collapse. And it still wasn't over. Because the Falaise gap had not yet closed. And the Germans who remained inside would do anything, to escape. Section 5. The moment the pocket collapsed. Previous section text. The bodies, the wreckage, the discarded helmets, everything along the crossroads told the same story. The Germans were done running. Now they were simply trying to survive. By late morning on August 19th, the sun sat high above St-Lambert glaring down through thinning smoke like a merciless spotlight. The heat returned, clinging to uniforms still damp from night sweat. Flies swarmed. The stench of burning fuel mixed with rotting livestock and exposed flesh. Even veterans gagged. Currie stood in the open, no helmet, sleeves rolled, Thompson slung over his shoulder, surveying the scene with unsettling composure. Somewhere beyond the crossroads, artillery thundered, but it was distant now, drifting farther away with each hour. The Allies were closing the Falaise gap from all directions. And the Germans trapped inside were running out of exits. A dispatch rider clattered up on a dusty motorcycle, skidding to a stop. He saluted, chest heaving. Message from brigade, sir. British and Polish forces are approaching Chamboy. Americans tightening from the south. The gap's almost shut. Almost. Currie nodded, eyes narrowing toward the east, toward the final road still open. They'll throw everything at us before it closes. As if summoned by the words, a low boom echoed across the wheat fields. Not artillery, mortar fire. The first round landed just outside the village, sending dirt spraying skyward. A second struck closer, rattling loose stones from ruined doorways. A third landed in the churchyard, shattering the few remaining gravestones. Incoming barrage, someone yelled. Men dove behind whatever cover remained. Tank hulks, broken carts, collapsed walls. Mortar whistles filled the air, falling faster now, bracketing their position. One exploded near a sandbag line, sending 2 Canadians tumbling backward. Medics dashed forward, dragging them away while shrapnel still clattered around them. Currie remained upright, moving deliberately between positions, assessing, directing, steadying. His voice cut through the chaos like a steel wire. Spread out. Don't bunch, use defilade. The barrage continued for nearly a minute, shaking the village to its bones, then abruptly stopped. Silence. Gagnon wiped dust from his eyes. Why'd they quit? Currie already knew. They're coming. From the tree line beyond the river appeared a staggering mass, infantry spilling into the fields, officers striking shoulders, urging forward motion. No formation. No coordinated advance. Just a flood of exhausted men, hundreds, maybe more, forcing their way toward the only road left. Some carried rifles. Many didn't. They're not attacking, Sergeant Kelm murmured, stunned. They're stampeding. But a stampede could still crush defenders. Currie didn't hesitate. Signal the Shermans. Block the road. Nobody passes. The tanks repositioned, engines roaring, filling the crossroads like iron barricades. Infantry crouched beside them, fixing bayonets, swapping magazines, rationing bullets they didn't have to spare. The first Germans reached the village outskirts, hands waving, voices hoarse. Bitter. Bitter. We surrender. Others shouted in French, Polish, English, anything they knew. But behind them came men who weren't surrendering, men firing wildly, desperate to force a path. Machine guns rattled from the waist. Grenades arced through the smoky air. The crowd surged violently, crushing their own wounded. Contact front. Gagnon bellowed. The Canadians fired, not uncontrolled, not panicked, but precise, disciplined, measured. Men dropped. Others tripped over them, trampled, shoved aside, crawling forward through mud and blood. Near the church steps, a German soldier collapsed, clutching at Currie's boot, gasping, "Please, don't shoot, no more." Currie knelt, nodding once to a nearby medic. "Take him. He's done." It was chaos, but controlled chaos. The crossroads still held. The German column fractured, some dropping rifles and lifting their hands, others scattering into nearby orchards, others still charging blindly toward the tanks until gunfire stopped them mid-stride. Within minutes, resistance dissolved entirely. A wave of surrendering soldiers washed into the square, hundreds raising their arms, eyes hollow, boots dragging. Canadians shepherded them into makeshift holding areas, rifles ready, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Too many Waffen-SS units had feigned surrender before turning their weapons on captors. Currie walked among them, scanning faces, old men, teenagers, decorated officers, bandaged privates. Every one of them looked the same now, defeated. A breathless lieutenant hurried up, shock still written across his features. "Sir, we've taken another 500 prisoners. That brings us to—" "I don't need the number," Currie interrupted gently. "Just make sure they're disarmed and guarded. No mistakes." More mortars never came. No armored counterattack materialized. No officers barked orders to regroup. The battlefield had gone quiet, not the expectant quiet from before, but the irreversible quiet after a fight is finished. Currie removed his beret, ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair, and finally, allowed himself to exhale. British reconnaissance Cromwells rolled into the village minutes later, their crews staring wide-eyed at the destruction, the burning vehicles, the mountains of surrendered weapons, and the small Canadian force still holding the square. One British officer climbed out, stunned. Good God, who commanded this sector? Currie turned, dust streaking his face, voice level but exhausted. "I did." The officer looked around again, disbelief sharpening his words. With this few men. Currie didn't answer, because the evidence surrounded them. The Falaise gap was sealed. The German escape route was gone. And one Canadian major, unknown outside his regiment until this moment, had shut the final door. Section 6. Aftermath of an impossible stand. Previous_section_text. For a long moment, no one spoke. The battlefield itself seemed to fall into shock, like even the ruins of St-Lambert needed time to comprehend what had happened here. It was early afternoon now, August 19th, 1944. The heat shimmered above the broken rooftops. Smoke still drifted from destroyed vehicles, curling into the sky like fragile black ribbons. The village fountain, once a place where children filled buckets, overflowed with shell fragments and shattered stone. Currie walked through it all slowly, deliberately, as if taking inventory not only of the damage, but of the cost. His boots stepped over scattered maps, abandoned helmets, twisted bicycle frames, shattered radios. Every object was a reminder. Someone carried this, someone used this, someone died beside this. A junior officer from the British 1st Polish Armoured Division jogged up, waving a folded map. "Major Currie, sir, our units have linked with the Americans near Chamboy. The pocket sealed. Completely." The words didn't stir celebration. They just settled into place, heavy, inevitable. Currie nodded once. "Good. Make sure headquarters knows St-Lambert is secure." Secure. The word felt cruel, almost insulting, when applied to a place that no longer resembled a village. Near the church, a group of German prisoners sat quietly under guard. Some stared blankly at the ground, others whispered prayers, and a few simply watched the Canadians, trying to understand how so few men stopped so many. One prisoner, an elderly medic with spectacles and a blood-stained armband, approached cautiously, hands raised. "You fought very hard," he said in accented English. "I thought we would make it through. All of us thought so." Currie didn't answer. He simply looked at him, calm, unreadable, then motioned for a Canadian corporal to escort the medic back. Praising the battle felt wrong. Too many men, Canadian and German, had been left behind in the rubble. By midday, photographers and war correspondents finally arrived, guided by whispers spreading through Allied lines. They stepped carefully among the debris, eyes wide, notebooks already scribbling. One reporter approached a Sherman tank commander leaning against his vehicle, smoking with shaking hands. "How'd you hold this?" the reporter asked. The commander exhaled slowly, staring at the horizon. "We didn't have time to think about that. We just didn't let them pass." A war photographer raised his camera toward Currie as he spoke to a group of infantrymen, pointing at a destroyed half-track while assessing future defensive angles. He wasn't posing, he was still commanding. Click. Another photo caught him leaning casually against a ruined wall, sleeves rolled, helmetless, a revolver on his hip. More like a man waiting for a train than someone who had just stopped an army. Click. Those images would one day define him, calm in the apocalypse. Medics continued working through the wounded. Canadians tried to reassure them, offering water, cigarettes, gentle words spoken in exhausted voices. Some wounded Germans wept, not from pain, but from being alive. A Canadian sergeant approached Currie. "Sir, prisoners are estimating over 2,000 Germans tried to get through this village." Currie glanced at the destroyed vehicles, the surrendered weapons piled into growing mountains. "And how many did we take?" The sergeant swallowed. "Close to 1,500, maybe more." Currie didn't respond. He didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves, and stunned even him. Later that afternoon, Brigadier Foster finally arrived in person. His jeep rolled to a stop beside the crossroads. He stepped out, jaw slack, eyes scanning the devastation. "My God," he whispered. "One company did all this." Currie stepped forward. He didn't salute immediately. Instead, he waited for the brigadier to meet his eye. Only then did he raise his hand. "Yes, sir. South Alberta Regiment and elements of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers. We held as ordered." Foster shook his head in disbelief. "No, Major. You didn't just hold. You closed the gate." The words carried weight, historic weight. Currie's reply was simple. "The men did their duty." Foster exhaled, voice tightening. "The entire British command has been trying to seal this pocket for a week. And you did it with a handful of tanks and 200 men." Currie didn't smile. "Sir, I'd like medical priority for the wounded, ours and theirs." Foster blinked, then nodded with visible respect. "Yes. Of course. Immediately." Evening approached again, warm and strangely quiet. Birds returned to the sky, circling above the wreckage as if reclaiming territory. The smoke thinned. Shadows grew long. Some Canadians sat together beside the crossroads, sharing what little rations remained. They barely spoke. Their faces were hollow, but not broken, just emptied, drained by the sheer magnitude of what they'd endured. Lieutenant Gagnon lit a cigarette, handing another to Currie. "You know," he said softly, "someone's going to write books about this one day." Currie took a long drag, staring at the silent, mangled road where the German 7th Army once placed its hopes. "If they do," he replied, "make sure they remember the ones who didn't walk out of here." Gagnon nodded. "They will, sir." For a moment, neither man looked like a soldier. Just men, tired, mortal, changed forever. A faint breeze stirred the dust. Somewhere nearby, a church bell, miraculously intact, swung gently in its damaged tower, letting out a cracked, uneven chime. St-Lambert had survived. Barely. And because it had, Normandy was finally, truly, won. But the war was far from over. Currie knew it. Every man here knew it. Some would not live to see the end. Section 7, Legacy of a Crossroads. Previous _section _text. Night fell again over St-Lambert, but this time it was different. The village was quiet, not because of fear, but because survival had carved a fragile, tentative calm. The men cleaned weapons, tended wounds, and whispered stories that were too heavy for daylight. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, a bird landed on a ruined roof, surveying the devastation below. Major David Currie walked through the village alone, boots crunching on shattered stone, surveying the road he had defended for nearly 48 hours without pause. The crossroads was still littered with wreckage, tanks twisted like broken toys, half-tracks burned to husks, rifles and helmets scattered across the cobblestones. And yet, it was here, in this desolate space, that history had been made. He paused beside a German soldier who had been quietly staring at the horizon. The young man's uniform was torn, face streaked with dirt and blood, and eyes wide with disbelief. "You lived," Currie said simply. The soldier nodded, trembling. No words came. None were needed. Currie turned and looked down the road toward the Falaise Gap. Beyond the rolling fields, the Allied armies were consolidating, tightening their grip, ensuring no escape. Thousands of Germans would be captured in the next days, and the nightmare of Normandy would finally come to a close. He allowed himself a moment, a single, deep breath. Behind him, his men moved quietly. Exhausted, hungry, but unbroken. Each one bore the same weight, that they had stood against overwhelming odds and held. And yet, Currie knew that medals and praise were meaningless in the face of the dead and wounded. Duty, courage, and discipline, that had been enough. That had saved the crossroads. Weeks later, Currie would be awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for gallantry in the British Commonwealth forces. But at this moment, the recognition meant nothing. He was already thinking of tomorrow, the logistics, the prisoners, the wounded, the next operation. The war moved forward, indifferent to bravery or heroism. Still, in the quiet of the ruined village, Currie allowed himself a flicker of pride. Against impossible odds, a handful of Canadians had stopped an entire army from escaping. And in doing so, they had changed the course of history in Normandy. The crossroads would never again see peace, but it would be remembered. Soldiers passing through, historians decades later, and even the townspeople returning to rebuild, all would know that here, at this battered junction of roads, courage had carved its mark into the earth. Currie walked toward the remaining Shermans, lifted his field glasses, and scanned the horizon one last time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village. Somewhere in the distance, artillery fire echoed faintly, a reminder that the war was not over, but that victory had been seized, here and now, by a single Canadian officer and his small but unyielding force. For Major David Currie, for St-Lambert for Normandy, the Falaise gap would remain closed forever. And the world would remember that courage, discipline, and resolve, even when faced with overwhelming odds, could change history. END